Episode 125, July 1st to 12th, 1916. The cost of a few craters, what a Frenchman saw at La Boisselle. By Paul Maz, DCM, MM, Croix de Guerre. The author, who in episode 26 gave a most thrilling account of his experiences during the retreat from Mons, here recounts the adventures which befell him during the first days of the Battle of the Somme, when he watched the taking of a few craters at great cost of life. Monsieur Paul Maz was a Frenchman attached to the staff of General Sir Hubert Gough, and acted as his observer in forward areas, and with the greatest intrepidity visited the front line on the eve of an attack, made sketches, and brought back to his general a first-hand account of the progress of an attack. Monsieur Maz is also shown in the British uniform that he wore while attached to General Gough's staff, an officer's uniform without a Sam Brown belt or rank badges. I was awakened by a hurricane bombardment, shaking everything. Already the divisions had gone over. Daylight was just entering my room. Sudden detonations in the sky diverted my attention from the uproar coming from the line. I looked out of the window and saw, high up above, a tiny speck racing and buzzing through the air, evading our shrapnel burst, which, after flashing, broke into yellowish balls of smoke. I went on with my dressing when the sudden quick rattle of machine guns made me look out again. There the space of limpid blue was divided as by a plummet line by a vertical spiral black smoke, which the fall of a plane in flames had left in its wake. The anti-aircraft guns had ceased firing. Up above all was peaceful again. The smoke from the shrapnel was expanding into long filaments which floated across the sky. The reserve army and 3 divisions were waiting to exploit the breach which the 4th Army had to make. As General Gough was going to the 4th Army headquarters in Querieux to keep in close touch with operations, he told me to follow on, as he might need me with my motorbike. Though still very early, it was already very hot. Waiting outside in the chateau grounds, I could see into the signal office, where hands were busy at switchboards. Staff motors, flying every description of little flags, were constantly arriving and departing, adding to the dust that rose into a thick veil on the main road. Ambulances had already started rolling by with their first loads of wounded. The noise of guns was alarming. The windows of the headquarters rattled from some heavy guns hidden in the park, firing off their big shells. The French, attacking simultaneously with us on the right, were contributing to the uproar. The first news received from the line was marked with success and filled us all with hopeful expectations. The right divisions had passed their first objectives and were going on. However, it was not so definite about the left. Conflicting reports were coming in. The situation there did not seem so clear. Formations of aeroplanes continuously passing overhead to and from the line were adding to the excitement by exchanging signals with tracer bullets. At the same time, the yellow nose of an observation balloon was looming in sight, tossing awkwardly over the tops of houses as it gathered height, pulling on its tight cable anchoring it to the ground. The light breeze was making ripples on the big envelope, now reducing its size as it rose towards the blue sky, the gondola swinging about as the observer inside reeled out his aerial and looked at the ground receding under him. Great tension was reigning in the office. I didn't envy the generals their responsibilities as they pored over maps and messages, and faced at every moment the taking of grave decisions. At noon, we knew that in front of Thiepval and Beaumont-Hamel, we had been severely checked. Of that, there was no more doubt. The attacks on the whole of the left front had failed. The casualties were very serious. The reserve army stood awaiting further developments. I went at night to Albert, where I knew that from some high ground I could look into La Boisselle and a wide stretch of the battleground. The line kept emerging from the darkness, illuminated by brilliant lights from a constant succession of soaring rockets, bursting and spreading into vivid colors, momentarily revealing quivering patches of the deep shade beyond. Our men were then bombing the craters in front of La Boisselle. Occasionally, the light showed up little figures crawling over broken ground. Behind me, the town of Albert was trembling with the shelling, as flashes from the guns played hide and seek through the beams of its gaping roofs and intermittently lit up as in daylight a wide streak of the Albert Bapaume road. A batch of dejected prisoners was being shepherded to a cage nearby, where their comrades packed in it were pressing their white faces against the netting, peering with curiosity at their new surroundings. Ambulances were taking away the wounded from the casualty clearing station in Albert. Lorries were packed with the lighter casualties, who waited their turn in big groups, all labeled with the nature of their wounds. Roads were crammed with marching troops and lorries. Dust was rising everywhere. Lanes of cavalry horses, contentedly munching hay, covered the rolling plains as far as Amiens, hidden in the darkness. On July 2nd, the Reserve Army came into the line, having taken over the shattered 8th and 10th Corps from the 4th Army the previous evening. The orders for renewing the attack were cancelled. Our headquarters were advanced to Toutoncourt, a typical Somme village, with its little church, a square called the Grand Place, a chateau, only in name, and farms with clay walls. We had difficulty in fitting in our daily growing establishment. General Gough sent me to Ovillers and La Boisselle to find out the conditions there. If possible, I was to make a sketch from a certain place. The brigade headquarters I had first to report at were in the trenches of Marche Valley. Taking a shortcut, I walked over the open across Usna Hill. Scattered in pits all over the place, our field guns were firing. I was nearly shaken out of my life. Terrified, I ran down towards Marche Valley, dodging about over the rough ground as each sharp detonation displaced the air around me. I was indeed relieved to find a communication trench, into which I jumped. It led to a dugout where, deep down in a tiny stuffy room, a general was writing out his orders. When I explained what I had come to do, he at once detailed a man to take me up to the front line. I stood watching my guide putting on his kit, squeezing his head into his steel helmet, grimacing as he tucked the strap under his chin. Picking up his rifle, he slung it over his shoulder, and without a word started towards the front line. Along a monotonous, dazzling, chalky trench we walked, seeing a streak of blue sky above and the sandbags drifting past. As each corner of the traverse eclipsed my companion for a second or two, I had the illusion of following my own shadow. I screwed up my neck looking for La Boisselle. All I could see of it were more sandbags over which smoke was drifting, following a succession of violent reports. We walked on. I could hear shells whining through the air, exploding ahead in a straight line towards the direction we were making for. I wanted to wait, but my guide strode on. I could still follow the whistling rush of each shell bursting nearer and nearer, until one landed in the next traverse and made everything rock with the violence of its explosion. Covered in earth, my heart racing, I looked at my runner, who, doubled up, had his chin between his knees as if he had been trying to squeeze his whole body under his steel helmet. I was relieved when he moved, unhurt. We moved on again. The firing, without easing off, lifted over our heads and followed a perfect course down the trench we had come up. A few yards farther on, mutilated bodies were lying amidst fallen earth and tumbled sandbags, directly where the parapet had been blown in. In the next traverse stood a group of wounded men, white and shaken, with blood oozing out of their riddled tunics. We helped some of them into a dugout, where others had been already carried to safety. The enemy had the range of every trench, and they shelled them day and night. By the time I had reached the front line, my interest in La Boisselle had nearly gone. Through a gap between two sandbags I was shown the village, where smoke was drifting across skeletons of trees on a torn-up mound. An uneven line of sandbags, stretching across piles of bricks and remnants of houses, faced our front trench. The enemy was there, a few yards away. His presence, so near and yet unseen, made upon me an uncanny impression. The ground between our trench and the ruins beyond was merely a stretch of craters and burnt-up grass, broken up by tangled wire, not unlike gorse bushes. The dead were lying there in all conceivable attitudes, rotting in the sun. A veil of fumes from lacrimatory shells was rolling along the ground. With the heat, the smell had become very trying. A small attack was to be made on the place that night. As I intended to see it, I went back to brigade headquarters to rest. The general was still busy with his plans. Late that night, I followed the company going up to the front line, making room all the way up for stretcher bearers moving down with their casualties. The trench was narrow, and we had to squeeze past each man. In the darkness, no one spoke. I found the battalion preparing for the attack. A heavy dew had made the ground clammy and slippery. It grew cold. Shells fired from Usna Hill were shrieking over our heads, crashing one after the other a little way beyond, in that mysterious gap. After an anxious wait, the men began assembling round the scaling ladders and got ready to climb onto the high parapet. Amongst much older men, a young Tommy was awaiting his turn. He seemed weighed down by his kit and the loose belts of extra ammunition hanging from his shoulders. His small head was buried beneath his tin helmet. In a long, nervous hand, he held a rifle with fixed bayonet, and looked anything but anxious to use it. Heavy thoughts seemed to be in that boy's mind, and the lack of enthusiasm displayed by the rest filled me with misgivings as to the ultimate success of the attack. Vitality is low at that hour. They were all moving slowly and in silence, while the officers, apparently keyed up, were now gazing at their watches as the last seconds slipped away and guns from the valley were angrily spitting fire. The first man clambered up the steps, followed by the rest, who stumbled forward into the night after the barrage, black figures silhouetted against the flares, flooding the broken ground with brilliant light. Machine guns raked the open space, shells tore the air, bullets thumped against the parapet. Wounded men were crawling back to safety, helped by a few terrified German prisoners. We waited. The waves hadn't got far. The few men who had survived the stretch of no man's land were scattered in shell holes just on the edge of the village. Once again, they had failed to reach an objective, which had already been obliterated. When day broke, fresh forms lying ominously still showed the cost of the few craters we had gained.
Brother Bert, he went away to do